Welcome to my colleague Agnes Thompson's channel. My name is Eleanor. I will share my man with you. Subscribe to us.
The pen felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, its cheap plastic body a stark contrast to the immense weight of the papers splayed across my oak dining table. The table, like everything else in this house, was a piece of my husband, Arthur. He'd crafted it from a massive oak that had fallen on our property the year Mark was born, spending an entire winter sanding its surface by hand until it shone like a pane of honeyed glass. He said a family's table should be strong enough to hold generations of meals and memories. Now, that same son, my Mark, was shifting his weight nervously beside it, a pained, tight smile on his face as his gaze flitted anywhere but at me. He kept looking at the grandfather clock in the corner, another of Arthur's creations, as if counting the seconds until his ordeal was over. "Just a few more, Mom," he said, his voice a little too bright, a little too strained, the kind of voice one uses to soothe a frightened animal or a difficult child. "It's just a lock in the new variable rate. A simple formality to get you a better return. The bank insists on these updates." I looked down at the dense blocks of text, a forest of legal jargon that my aging eyes, even with my strongest reading glasses, could barely penetrate. Reverse mortgage. Fiduciary. Escrow. Irrevocable power of attorney. The words swam like sharks in a murky sea, meaningless and menacing. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold whisper of warning from deep within my bones that had nothing to do with the autumn chill seeping through the window panes. It was a feeling I hadn't had since the night Arthur's fever broke for the last time. A feeling of something vital slipping away. I saw the truth not in the documents, but in the fine details of my son's demeanor, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he pointed to the signature line, the way he unconsciously chewed on the inside of his lower lip. A nervous habit he'd had since he was a little boy terrified of the shadows in his bedroom. He was hiding from me now, hiding behind a wall of corporate language and feigned concern. "Mark, are you absolutely sure about this?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended, betraying my uncertainty. "Arthur always said you should never sign a paper you can't read, and you should never trust a man who won't look you in the eye." A flicker of raw irritation crossed his handsome face, a flash of the impatient man he had become, but it was quickly smoothed over with a practiced, placating smile. "Mom, that was a different world, a different time. Things are much more complicated now. This is to help you. It's what Dad would want. To make sure your finances are secure so you don't have to worry about a thing ever again." His words were meant to be a comforting blanket, but they felt like a net. He spoke of security, but his eyes darted around the room as if he were a thief. He was securing something, but I was beginning to fear it wasn't me. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had managed a household for 60 years on a shoestring and a prayer, who had stretched a single mechanic's income through recessions and lean times, who knew the precise moment to plant tomatoes to avoid the late frost, and how to set a broken bone with nothing but 2 sturdy sticks and clean cloth when the doctor was a town away. I had navigated the labyrinth of life with common sense and intuition. But to my son, I was no longer a person of substance. I was a relic, a liability, an old woman who needed her finances secured by a son who couldn't even fix his own leaky faucet. Against my better judgment, against the silent scream in the deepest part of my gut, I signed the last page. My signature, once a firm, confident, looping script, was now a spidery, hesitant thing, the tremble in my hand betraying the one in my heart. As I lifted the pen, I felt a profound and unsettling sense of finality, as if I hadn't just signed a document, but had closed a door on my entire life, locking myself on the wrong side of it. I had trusted him. In the end, that's what mothers do. We leap into the dark for our children, even when we suspect there's nothing there to catch us. After he left, gathering the papers with a speed that felt predatory and kissing my cheek with the breezy detachment of a man already thinking about his next meeting, the silence of the house pressed in on me with a physical force. This house was my life's great work, a duet I had performed with Arthur for nearly half a century. He had been the builder, a quiet man who believed in the integrity of oak beams, the honesty of copper pipes, and the solemn promise of foundations sunk deep into the earth. I was the keeper, The one who filled its sturdy frame with the scent of baking bread and apple pie, the sound of children's laughter, and the quiet, steady rhythm of a family's love. Every creak in the floorboards was a memory of a midnight dance in the living room. Every faded patch on the floral wallpaper was a story of a pillow fort gone awry. To me, it wasn't a structure. It was the living, breathing repository of my heart. 2 weeks later, Mark returned, and he brought my granddaughter, Chloe, with him. She was 16, a beautiful, sharp-edged creature of glowing screens and sullen silences, her thumbs a constant, frantic blur across the surface of her phone. She entered the house not as a home, but as a space she was being forced to occupy. "We came to help you declutter, Grandma," she announced, though her tone suggested it was a court-ordered punishment for a crime she didn't commit. Mark nodded in agreement, already scanning the living room with a critical, appraising eye that made my skin crawl. "It's time to modernize a bit, Mom. All this stuff. It's a bit much. It's overwhelming." People these days, especially buyers, they like clean lines, minimalism. Less personal clutter. My stuff was a curated collection of my life's journey. The hand-carved cuckoo clock from a trip to Germany we could barely afford, its cheerful chirp a reminder of a youthful extravagance. The rows of sea glass in mason jars on the windowsill, each piece a memory of a family vacation to a windswept coast. Arthur's woodworking tools, hanging silently on the pegboard in the corner, each one holding the ghost of his hands. I picked up a small, intricately carved wooden songbird from the mantelpiece, its tiny form fitting perfectly in my palm. "Your grandfather made this for me on our first anniversary," I said, hoping to draw them in, to make them see. "He said every house needs a songbird to keep its heart light. He used a special kind of cedar, one that hardens over time but never, ever loses its scent. Lean in, you can still smell it." Chloe glanced up from her phone for a fraction of a second, her eyes unfocused. "Cool," she mumbled, her attention already pulled back to the digital world in her hands. She hadn't even tried to smell it. Mark, meanwhile, was taking pictures with his phone. "We could sell some of this online," he suggested, tapping a photo of a hand-stitched quilt my own mother had made. "You'd be surprised what people pay for authentic vintage things. It would add a nice little bump to your nest egg." The phrase made me flinch, as if he'd flicked me with his finger. They saw my life as a collection of assets to be liquidated, my home as a product to be packaged and sold, my history as a nest egg to be cracked open. I tried again, a desperate urgency creeping into my voice. "Mark, this house is more than just boards and nails. Remember what your father used to say about the foundation? He laid the stones himself, using the old dry stack method he learned from his grandfather. No mortar. He said a mortared wall will crack under pressure, but a dry stack wall will shift and settle, it will breathe with the earth. He swore this house would stand when all the new ones had been blown away." Mark's smile was kind, but his eyes were patronizing. "Dad was a great guy, Mom, a true artist, but he was a bit of a romantic, wasn't he? Building codes and materials have advanced so much since his time. We have engineers and soil reports and high-tensile steel for that now. It's a science." He didn't see. He looked at the house his father had bled for, and all he saw was outdated construction and untapped market value. He looked at me, his mother, and saw not a wellspring of family history and hard-won wisdom, but a problem to be managed, an asset to be leveraged. The cold whisper of doubt I'd felt while signing those papers had grown into a shivering, terrifying premonition. I was becoming a stranger in my own home, the lonely curator of a museum no one wanted to visit. And as I watched my son and his daughter move through my life with the detached efficiency of estate appraisers, I understood that the theft of my home hadn't begun with a pen and a stack of papers. It had begun years earlier, with the slow, creeping erosion of value, respect, and love. The first real sign that my unease was not just an old woman's paranoia, but a terrifying reality appeared 3 days later. It was a sterile, professionally printed rectangle of plastic and metal, hammered into the soft earth of my front lawn while I was out back, tending to the roses Arthur had planted for me. It read, in bold, impersonal, blood-red letters, "For sale." My heart seized in my chest, a painful, violent contraction. The world tilted on its axis, and the sweet, cloying scent of the roses suddenly smelled like funeral wreaths. I sank onto the porch steps, my knees too weak to hold me, my hand trembling as I pulled out my phone to call Mark. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice harried and impatient, as if my call was an interruption to his important life. "Mom? Is everything okay? I'm in the middle of something." "Mark, there's a sign," I said, my voice a strangled whisper. "A for sale sign. In my yard. Right in front of your father's roses." There was a pause on the other end, a crackle of static that seemed to stretch for an eternity. In that silence, I heard the entire unspoken truth. "Oh, right. That," he finally said, his voice dropping the pretense of surprise. "I was going to mention that." "Mom, don't worry about it. It's just exploratory. We're just testing the market. Getting a feel for what the house might be worth in the current climate. It doesn't mean anything." But it meant everything. It was a public declaration of the private betrayal I had felt. My home, my sanctuary, my life's work, was now a commodity with a price tag, available for any stranger to walk through, to judge, to pick apart. The next weekend, the invasion began. A realtor with a dazzling, predatory smile and cold, calculating eyes came by. Mark was there, of course, playing the role of the proud, responsible son to perfection. "My mother has kept the place in absolutely wonderful condition," he'd say with a sweep of his arm, while simultaneously pointing out all the things a new owner would want to update or gut. I tried to interject, to share the hidden soul of the house, to be its advocate. "The fireplace flue is double-lined with soapstone," I told the realtor, who was tapping at the mantel with a manicured finger. "My husband designed it that way himself. Even on the coldest winter night, it will hold and radiate heat through the entire ground floor for hours after the fire has died." She just smiled, that brilliant, empty smile. "That's a nice feature. Of course, a clean-burning gas insert would be much more efficient and less hassle for a modern family." I felt a growing sense of desperation, of being erased from my own life story. The house held secrets, layers of ingenuity and love that no home inspector with a clipboard would ever find or appreciate. One afternoon, as Mark was discussing the glorious possibility of opening up the floor plan with a potential buyer, a young tech millionaire who looked like he'd never held a hammer in his life, I pulled my son aside, my fingers gripping his expensive cashmere sleeve. "Mark, you can't let them touch the main beam in the living room ceiling," I whispered, my voice urgent and low. "That's a single piece of old-growth Canadian spruce. Your father cured it for 2 full years in the old barn before he even brought it inside. He said it was the heart of the house, the spine. It's settled in a specific way that distributes the roof's weight perfectly. If you move it, the whole structure could be compromised." He cut me off with a long, suffering sigh, the sound heavy with the weight of my perceived foolishness. "Mom, please. You're being dramatic. It's a beam. A piece of wood. Architects and structural engineers know how to handle these things. It's not some magical artifact from a fairy tale." He turned back to the buyer with an apologetic smile. "Imagine this whole wall gone. You'd have a beautiful, uninterrupted, open-concept living space, perfect for entertaining." His dismissal was more painful than a slap. It was an invalidation of my memory of his father's expertise. He and Chloe had started referring to my stories as grandma's folktales. They didn't do it with malice, but with the casual, unthinking cruelty of the thoroughly modern mind, for which anything that cannot be quantified, verified online, or converted into data simply doesn't exist. The more I tried to impart the wisdom Arthur had built into these very walls, the more they treated me like a faded, talking photograph, a ghost whose whisperings were an inconvenience. The full, crushing weight of my new reality fell into place a few days later when an official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. It wasn't addressed to me, but to current occupant. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a cold, formal notice of sale, detailing the transaction that had already occurred. The house had been sold. The name of the new owner, a family I'd never met, was listed in black and white. The date of closing was 3 weeks away. The papers I had signed, the ones he said were for a better rate, hadn't been for a reverse mortgage. They had given Mark my irrevocable power of attorney. He had sold my house from under me while smiling to my face. I sat at Arthur's table, the letter lying flat on the honey-colored wood, and I did not cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too absolute. It felt like a phantom limb, a deep, gnawing ache in a place where a foundational piece of my soul used to be. My son, my own flesh and blood, had looked at my life, my home, my history, and had calculated its cash value. And he had found it wanting. I felt a profound sense of helplessness, a feeling that my world had been taken over by a language I didn't speak, a value system I didn't recognize. But as the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the living room floor, a different feeling began to smolder beneath the cold ash of my grief. It was not anger, not yet. It was observation. It was clarity. I had been a fool, but I would not be a victim. Mark thought he was dealing with a frail, sentimental, helpless old woman. He had no idea who I really was. He had no idea what Arthur had taught me. He had no idea what this house was truly capable of. The last few weeks in the house were a blur of quiet packing and hollow, silent goodbyes. I moved like an automaton through the rooms, wrapping my life in newspaper and placing it gently into cardboard boxes. Each object I touched held a memory, a story, but the pain of the betrayal was a thick film over everything, dulling the colors, silencing the joyous echoes. A china doll from my childhood, a stack of love letters from Arthur tied with a faded ribbon, Chloe's first clay handprint, now hard and permanent. Mark had arranged it all with terrifying efficiency. He had found me a small, sterile, one-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex on the other side of town called Golden Vistas. It was clean, efficient, and utterly soulless, with beige walls and beige carpets and windows that looked out onto a parking lot. He called it a new, worry-free chapter for me. I called it a waiting room, a place to be stored until I was no longer a problem. The day I had to hand over the keys, the new owners were there, a young, stylish couple named David and Sarah, with two small children who ran through the empty rooms, their joyful shouts echoing in a way that felt like a violation. They were polite but distant, their minds already filled with grand plans for renovation. "We're so excited to make this place our own," Sarah said, her eyes already mentally tearing down the wallpaper I had chosen with Arthur. "We're taking out all this dark wood, putting in massive skylights, really brightening it up and maximizing the light." I just nodded, a ghost at the funeral of my own life, and pressed the cold, familiar keys into her hand. Mark drove me to the new apartment in his silent, expensive car. He was relieved, I could tell. He had done it. He had solved the problem of his aging mother. He had secured my finances, or rather, his future inheritance, and moved me into a safe, manageable box where I wouldn't be a burden. He unpacked a few boxes for me, the ones labeled essentials, hooked up the television, and left with a brisk, cheerful promise to visit soon. That night, I sat on a beige sofa that smelled faintly of plastic and chemicals and listened to the unfamiliar hums and clicks of the building. The feeling of defeat was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had failed. I had failed to protect Arthur's legacy. I had lost my home, my anchor, my history. It seemed, in that quiet, desolate moment, that Mark had won. He had traded my life for a sum of money, and there was nothing I could do. The game was over. And then, something shifted. It started with the television I hadn't bothered to turn off. The local news channel had broken in with a special report. A storm was brewing over the ocean. A big one. The meteorologist, a woman with a worried face, used words like unprecedented, historic, and monstrous. They had given it a name, Hurricane Astrid. As they showed the swirling, angry red and yellow mass on the satellite map and its projected path, a cold dread, mingled with a strange, electric certainty, trickled down my spine. The storm was heading directly for our coastline. I thought of Arthur, his hands covered in sawdust, his face thoughtful. He'd been obsessed with the local weather patterns, a farmer's son who never lost his deep respect for the power of the sky. "Eleanor," he used to say, standing on our porch and pointing out at the wide valley, All the water from that entire ridge, from every creek and every stream, it all flows right down to this spot. It's why the land is so good. But one day, a storm will come that nobody remembers, the kind that happens once in a century. All these new houses they're slapping up down the road won't stand a chance. But this house will be ready. This house will remember how to stand. The news grew more frantic over the next 2 days. The storm was upgraded to a Category 4. Evacuation orders were being issued for all low-lying areas. The city was shutting down. I called Mark. "Are you and Chloe prepared for the storm?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady and calm as I could manage. "We're fine, Mom," he said, and I could hear that familiar touch of impatience in his tone, even over the phone. "Our new development has underground power lines and a state-of-the-art drainage system. We'll be fine. You just stay put and don't worry." "It's not you I'm worried about, Mark. It's the old house. I need you to call the new owners. I need you to call David and Sarah." There was a heavy sigh, the sound of a man at the end of his rope. "Mom, I told you, it's not our problem anymore. It passed all the modern inspections. They'll be fine. Let it go." "No, they won't be fine," I insisted, my voice rising with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Your father built a failsafe. You have to tell them. Listen to me. In the basement, behind the furnace, there's a section of the old stone wall that looks different. It's darker, smoother. It's not a wall, Mark, it's a door. It opens to an old sluice gate that connects directly to the deep creek bed. Arthur designed it to divert a major flood surge away from the foundation. If they don't open that gate before the storm hits its peak, the hydrostatic pressure will have nowhere to go. It will buckle the foundation. The house will collapse from the bottom up." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with disbelief and annoyance. It was the silence of a man who thought his mother had finally lost her mind. "A secret door in the basement? Mom, you sound like one of your folk tales. You've been watching too many movies. It's a stone wall. Please, just let it go. They're probably busy boarding up their new, modern windows." "Mark, I am begging you," I said, my voice breaking. "This is not a story. This is your father's wisdom. This is his love for this family, for this home, poured into stone and iron. You owe him this. You owe me this. Please, just make the one call." "I have to go, Mom," he said, his voice cold and final, shutting me down completely. "I have my own family to worry about now. You're safe where you are. They'll be safe in their house. Goodbye." The line went dead. He had dismissed me. He had dismissed his father. At the peak of my desperation, when lives could genuinely be at stake, my knowledge was still worthless to him. It was the ultimate act of disregard, the final proof that in his shiny, modern world, I was nothing but a nuisance. I sat in my beige apartment, the wind beginning to howl outside my window like a hungry wolf, and I felt the last of my hope drain away. I had tried and I had failed. The house, Arthur's Ark, and the innocent family inside it were on their own. The storm arrived with a fury that defied all predictions and terrified the television meteorologists. It wasn't just a hurricane, it was a behemoth, a monstrous, churning engine of wind and water that seemed intent on scouring the earth clean. From my fourth-floor apartment window, I watched as the sky turned a bruised, sickly green-gray. The wind screamed, a high, terrifying shriek that vibrated through the concrete of my building. The rain came down not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that erased the world, turning the landscape into a gray, churning chaos. My phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the roar. It was Chloe, her voice small and tight with a fear she couldn't hide behind her usual teenage apathy. "Grandma? Are you there? The power's out. I can hear things breaking outside. It's really loud." "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my own heart aching for her. "I'm right here. Tell me what's happening. Where's your dad?" "He's in the basement," she said, her voice trembling. "He keeps shouting about the sump pump. He says it should be working, but it's not. There's water coming up from the floor." "Grandma, I'm scared." "I know you are, Chloe. It's okay to be scared. Just stay on the phone with me. Tell me what you see. We'll get through it together." For the next hour, I became a remote witness to the failure of my son's state-of-the-art house. I listened to the sounds of his modern life being systematically dismantled by nature. I heard Mark shouting in the background, his voice tight with panic and disbelief. I heard the ominous slosh of rising water and Chloe's frightened sobs as she described the muddy water seeping up the basement stairs. His modern marvel, built for maximum profit on a quickly developed plot of land, was no match for the raw, ancient power of the water. All its clean lines and minimalist design were being washed away by mud and debris. My own building, a brutalist concrete tower, was holding firm, a testament to function over form, but I felt every gust of wind like a physical blow. My thoughts, however, were not just with Mark and Chloe. They were consumed by the old house and the family trapped inside it. I pictured the water rising, pressing with unimaginable force against the foundation Arthur had laid with his own hands, stone by stone. I prayed that my warning had somehow miraculously been heeded, but I knew in my heart it hadn't. Mark had dismissed me, and in doing so, had condemned them. I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a knife twisting in my gut. I had been dismissed. I had been a fool. Then, around midnight, at the absolute peak of the storm's violence, when the whole building groaned under the strain, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a robocall or a wrong number. But some instinct, some deep, primal urge, made me swipe to answer. "Hello." I shouted over the din, "Is this Eleanor Vance?" A man's voice yelled back, the roar of the wind almost drowning him out. "Yes, this is she. This is David Keller. My wife Sarah and we bought your house." He sounded out of breath, on the edge of panic, but there was something else in his voice too. Awe. Utter, disbelieving awe. "My God, your house. We're okay. We're dry. I don't understand." I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. "What happened? What did you do?" Your son, Mark. He called me," David said, his voice thick with emotion and static. "He called me an hour ago, screaming like a madman over the wind. He was crying, I think. He told me about the wall. The secret door behind the furnace. He said his mother had told him to call me, that it was the only way. I thought he was crazy. Delirious. But we were taking on water fast. The windows were bowing. I was sure we were going to lose the house. I was desperate. So my wife and we went down there, and it was just like he said. A section of wall, darker than the rest. It looked like solid stone. It took both of us all our weight to get it open, but it moved. And the sound, Eleanor, it was like pulling the plug on the entire ocean. The water that had built up around the foundation, it rushed out into that channel with this incredible roar. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He paused, and I could hear him choke up over the phone. "Eleanor, every other house on our street is flooded to the windows. The new one next door, the foundation is gone. It just collapsed. But this place, this house is like a rock. It's an ark. It barely trembles. Your husband, what kind of a man was he? He didn't just build a house. He built a fortress. He built a lifeboat." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent in the dark of my room. Arthur's wisdom. Arthur's hands. It hadn't been a folktale. It had been a prophecy, a promise kept in stone and foresight and love. But it was the first thing the man had said that truly stunned me, that echoed in my soul. "Your son," he called me. Mark. My Mark. In the middle of his own crisis, while his own expensive, modern home was flooding and failing around him, he had remembered my words. He had pushed past his pride, his skepticism, his arrogance. In his moment of ultimate terror, he had chosen to believe me. He had made the call. It wasn't the storm that had broken through the walls of his new house. It was my words, his father's legacy, that had finally broken through the walls around his heart. 2 days later, the world was quiet, clean, and dripping. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of biblical devastation and, in the bright, clear sunlight, a strange sense of renewal. The sun shone on a city that looked like a child's toy set, kicked over and strewn about by a giant, angry toddler. My phone call with David Keller felt like a dream, but the profound sense of peace in my heart was real and solid. There was a knock on my apartment door. It was a tentative, almost shy knock, nothing like Mark's usual confident rap. I opened it to find him and Chloe standing there. They were haggard, their clothes were damp and stained with mud, but it was their eyes that struck me. The arrogance, the impatience, the casual dismissiveness, it was all gone, washed away by the flood. In its place was a raw, aching humility that was more eloquent than any apology. Mark couldn't seem to meet my gaze. He just looked at the beige carpet, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mom," he began, but his voice cracked on the single word. He had to stop, swallow hard, and wipe at his eyes with the back of his hand. It was Chloe who spoke next, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on me with a new kind of wonder. "Grandma, the man from your old house. Mr. Keller. He called Dad this morning. He said you saved them. You saved their family. You saved their home." I looked at my son, and for the first time in so many years, I saw the little boy he used to be, the child who used to hide from thunderstorms by burying his face in my lap. I saw his fear, his shame, and his dawning, earth-shattering realization of the true scope of his folly. "The value," Mark said, finally looking up at me, his eyes full of tears that he no longer tried to hide. The whole time, I was trying to unlock the value of the house. I was so proud of myself. I thought it was about money, about the market, about selling it for a profit to secure your future. I thought I was so smart, so modern, so progressive. He let out a harsh, broken laugh. But I was a fool. An arrogant, blind fool. The real value was never in the wood or the land or the square footage. It was in him. It was in Dad. And it was in you. You were the keeper of it all, the librarian of his wisdom, and I sold the library for firewood. I threw you away. I threw it all away for nothing." He finally broke then, covering his face with his hands as heavy, wrenching sobs shook his entire body. Chloe, her own eyes wet with tears, put a tentative arm around her father's shoulders, a gesture of comfort that seemed new for both of them. The title I had chosen in my heart for this final chapter, "He's About to See How Wrong He Is," had come true, but not in the way my anger had once imagined. His punishment wasn't ruin or my revenge. His punishment was his own clarity. It was the devastating, lifelong knowledge of what he had so carelessly lost, not because of a storm, but because of his own spiritual blindness. I stepped forward into the hallway and pulled my son into my arms. I held him as he cried, my hand stroking his back just as I had done when he was a child who'd fallen and scraped his knee. There was no "I told you so." There was no bitterness. There was only the quiet, powerful strength of a mother's love, a force more resilient than any hurricane, more enduring than any stone foundation. The house was gone from our lives, and it wasn't coming back. But I understood now that the house had only ever been a vessel. The true inheritance, Arthur's incredible legacy of wisdom, foresight, and love, had survived. It had finally been passed on. It had finally been received. Later, as we sat together in the sterile apartment that no longer felt like a prison, but a harbor, Chloe spoke. "Grandma," she asked, her phone sitting dark and forgotten on the table beside her. "The man, Mr. Keller, he asked Dad what kind of man Grandpa was. He wanted to know. What was he like?" And I began to tell her. I told her about the quiet boy with calloused hands who could name every tree in the forest by its bark and every bird by its song. I told her about the man who believed that a home wasn't just a shelter from the rain, but a promise made to the future, a testament to the idea that some things should be built to last. I told her the stories, not as folk tales or quaint anecdotes to be dismissed, but as the foundational stones of our family, the living history that ran in her veins. Mark listened, his face full of remorse and a new, quiet respect. The warm family ties, which had been stretched thin and brittle, were slowly, carefully, beginning to knit themselves back together, stronger now, reinforced with the truth. He hadn't just seen that he was wrong about my helplessness. He had seen that he was wrong about everything that truly mattered. And in that shared moment of loss and rediscovery, we began to build something new, not with wood and stone, but on a foundation of forgiveness, humility, and a love that was finally, truly, recognized as priceless.